On Christmas Eve, my son-in-law grabbed my gift and threw it straight into the trash. He sneered, "Cheap country junk." I quietly walked away. At the train station, my daughter stopped me and said, "Dad, you have two choices: apologize to my in-laws or leave and grow old alone." 3 weeks later, I bought a one-way ticket. What I left behind turned my daughter's face pale the moment she discovered it. She finally understood exactly what she had thrown away forever. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment: where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? If this story moves you, share it. Subscribe to Dad Returns. A small note: this story weaves in fictional elements for storytelling purposes. The names and places are imagined, but everything it's trying to say to you is worth hearing. There are two kinds of cold in New York in December. The kind that bites your face the moment you step outside, that one I knew. 43 winters on Long Island had made us well acquainted. But the other kind, the kind that waits for you inside a room full of people who have already decided what you are, that one I had been slower to recognize. I was still learning it when the N train pulled into Times Square and the doors rattled open, and a man in a navy suit that had seen better decades stood up and told himself it was going to be a fine evening. I had bought that suit in 2009 for Eleanor's cousin's wedding in Connecticut. She had stood behind me in the mirror at Macy's, adjusting the collar with both hands, and said, "Robert Calloway, you look like a man who built something worth wearing a suit for." I had kept it because of that sentence. Because of the way she said it, not like a compliment, but like a fact she was simply reporting. I wore it tonight because I wanted Daniel Preston to see me in it. I wanted my daughter to see me in it. I had been making that kind of small private effort for 3 years ever since Eleanor passed, and Diane's visits started arriving with longer gaps between them, and I started showing up to dinners the way a man shows up to job sites he hasn't been called to in a while, early, prepared and quietly hoping the work is still his. The box sat on my lap the whole ride in. Cherrywood hand-carved, the lid fitted with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years making things that didn't wobble. Inside it, wrapped in a square of green felt, was a wooden horse the size of a man's fist, mane carved in individual strokes, legs proportioned correctly, the kind of toy that takes patience rather than money. I had worked on it every evening in October and November at the kitchen table, the wood shavings falling into Eleanor's old mixing bowl that I kept underneath as a catch basin, the way she always set it there when I carved near her kitchen. Lily was 7 years old, and she had told me at Thanksgiving 2 years ago that she wished she had a horse. I had remembered. The Vance residence on the Upper East Side was the kind of building that made the street feel like it was auditioning. White limestone facade, a doorman in a coat that probably cost more than my first truck, string lights across the entrance that glowed with the particular restraint of money that no longer needed to announce itself. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the December air, my breath fogging the box under my arm, and straightened my jacket the way Eleanor used to straighten it for me. Then I rang the bell. Gloria Vance opened the door herself, which surprised me until I understood it was not an accident. She was a tall woman, silver-haired, in a dress the color of Merlot, with the posture of someone who had been correct about most things for so long that she had stopped checking. Her smile was warm the way a contract is warm, technically correct, no excess. "Mr. Calloway." She extended her hand. "How punctual. Please come in, it's absolutely dreadful out there tonight." The entry hall was marble and candlelight, and the smell of pine and something expensive being served in crystal. 15 people in the main room beyond the women in gowns and the men in dark suits that were not from 2009, and the sound of a string quartet somewhere I couldn't locate. "The other guests are just gathering," Gloria said, her eyes making a pass from my collar to my shoes, so brief and so precise that I understood it was practiced. "I'm afraid the main table is rather fully committed this evening. We have some of Preston's partners and their families, and the seating has been rather carefully arranged. She touched my arm light as a bird landing on a wire. We've set up something more comfortable for you near the kitchen. More intimate, actually. I do hope you understand the other guests have certain expectations of the atmosphere. I looked past her shoulder into the main room. Preston stood near the fireplace with a group of men laughing at something. And Diane, my daughter, in a blue gown I had never seen, stood beside him, with her hand on his arm. And our eyes met across the room for exactly 3 seconds before she turned toward the woman speaking to her and smiled as though she had not seen anything at all. My chest did something tight and specific that I recognized but did not name. Of course, I said to Gloria, lead the way. The table near the kitchen was a small, round two-top, tucked behind a serving station beside the corridor the waitstaff used to move between the kitchen and the main room. A single-place setting. A water glass already filled, which struck me as either thoughtful or precise, and I could not decide which. I set the box on the chair beside me and sat down, and from where I sat I could see the main table long, formal gleaming, and the backs of the guests who had been deemed appropriate to sit at it. I poured myself water. I cut my dinner roll. I watched my daughter laugh at something a woman in pearls said, and I thought about the kitchen table on Merrick Road, where Diane had done her homework for 12 years, and the way Eleanor would bring her a glass of milk without being asked, setting it down without interrupting, because Eleanor understood that some kinds of love were quietest when they were most sure of themselves. I was thinking about that when I heard the small feet. Fast, light, purposeful, the footsteps of a child who has somewhere specific to be and no patience for the long way around. They came from the far side of the room around the end of the serving station, and then Lily appeared in front of me like a declaration red-cheeked from running hair, half escaped from whatever it had been arranged into, wearing a green velvet dress she was already pulling at the collar of, because Lily had never in her life been comfortable in formal clothes, a quality I found deeply respectable. In her hand was a small red plastic device rectangular about the size of a matchbox. "Grandpa Robert," she announced, slightly out of breath. "I found you." "You did," I said. "You always do." She threw her arms around my neck with the whole-body commitment that only children and very old dogs still manage, and I held on, and the tightness in my chest did something complicated, not going away, but shifting, making room for this too. "What have you got there?" I asked, nodding at the red device when she pulled back. She held it up with the gravity of someone presenting evidence. "My reporter recorder," she said. "Miss Patterson says a reporter always has to be ready. I record important things." She demonstrated by pressing the button. A small red light blinked on. "I recorded the fireplace this morning, and the soup, and Daddy on the phone." "Sounds like a busy morning." "Very," she agreed and set the recorder on the table beside my bread plate, with the seriousness of a journalist establishing her equipment. "I'm going to record the sound of the party." She pulled out the chair beside me and climbed up, and I looked at her, this small, certain entirely, herself child, who shared no blood with me and had, from the first time we met, treated me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I thought, whatever else this evening turns out to be, this part of it is all right. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "I already ate," she said. "Daddy said the food out here was for after, but I can sit with you." "I'd like that," I said. She picked up my spoon and looked at her reflection in it, upside down, with the focus of a scientist. And from across the marble and candlelight and carefully arranged expectations of that room, not one person at the main table glanced our way. Lily had opinions about everything. In the 20 minutes she sat beside me at that small round table near the kitchen corridor, I learned that the soup course had been too salty, but in a good way, that the string quartet was playing a song she recognized from a movie but couldn't name, and that the woman in the red dress near the fireplace had the same laugh as a sea lion, which Lily demonstrated quietly into her hand so only I could hear. I laughed. Actually laughed the short, chest-deep kind that surprised me with how badly I had needed it. "You're very observant," I told her. "Miss Patterson says that's the most important thing a reporter can be," Lily said. She had retrieved the red recorder from beside my bread plate and was holding it in both hands, now pointed generally toward the room. "I've been recording this whole time. The party sounds different than I thought it would." "How did you think it would sound?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Happier," she said finally. I had no answer for that, so I didn't try to give her one. Instead, I reached into my jacket's inner pocket and pulled out the photograph I had been carrying since September, the one I'd had reprinted at the Walgreens on Merrick Road, because the original had started to curl at the corners. Eleanor Summer of 2018 standing on the front steps of our house with one hand raised to block the afternoon sun, and her head tipped back, laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. The light in that picture was the particular gold of a Long Island July, and it had always made the photograph look like something from a movie about a life that was better than most. "Can I show you something?" I asked Lily. She lowered the recorder immediately and leaned in the way children do when they understand that what's coming is real. I set the photograph on the table between us. Lily studied it for a long moment. Not the quick glance of a child being polite, but the careful looking of someone who understood that certain things required more than a second. "She's laughing really hard," Lily said. "She was," I said. She laughed like that at everything. The good things and the hard things both. She had a gift for finding what was funny about a situation, even when the situation wasn't being cooperative. "I remember her hands," Lily said quietly. "She had soft hands. She let me braid her hair once. I was only 5, so it wasn't very good, but she said it was beautiful and wore it like that for the whole afternoon." My throat did something I was not prepared for. I pressed the back of my thumb against the corner of my eye, quick and deliberate, and cleared my throat. "She would be very glad to hear you remember that," I said. "She talked about you, you know, after that visit." Lily looked up from the photograph. Her eyes were serious and brown and entirely present in the way that children's eyes are before the world teaches them to be somewhere else while their bodies are in the room. "I miss her," Lily said, "even though I only met her twice. Is that allowed?" "Missing someone isn't about how many times you met them," I said. "It's about what they left in the room when they were there. Eleanor left a lot." Lily nodded slowly, accepting this as fact. Then she picked up the recorder and pointed it at the photograph with great ceremony. "I'm going to record this, Pum," she announced. "For important things." She pressed the button. The red light blinked on. I was watching her face, the small frown of concentration, the way she held the device with both hands like a chalice, when I became aware of footsteps behind me. Not the quick, light steps of serving staff. Slower, more deliberate. The particular rhythm of a man crossing a room he owns. Preston stopped beside the table. He looked at the photograph, the way he looked at most things that didn't belong to his world, with the brief dismissive attention of a man cataloging what requires removal. "What is this doing out here?" he said. Not a question. The sentence had the shape of a question, but the weight of something already decided. "Really, Mr. Calloway, a personal photograph at a formal dinner, in the middle of the table." Lily's chin came up. "We were looking at Grandma Eleanor." "This isn't the time or place," Preston said, reaching past Lily and picking up the photograph with 2 fingers, the way you'd pick up something you weren't sure about. He turned and handed it without looking to a passing waiter carrying a tray of used glassware. "Take this to the back, please." The waiter, young, tired, halfway through a long shift, took it without registering what it was, and kept moving toward the kitchen. The photograph disappeared into the crowd. Lily's mouth opened. Her whole body went rigid the way a child's body goes when something happens so fast and so wrong that it takes a moment for the understanding to arrive. When it did, her eyes went wide and glassy, and she turned to look at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before: the specific devastation of a child who has just watched an adult do something she didn't know adults were allowed to do. My hands were flat on the table. I pressed them down hard against the surface, feeling the cloth, focusing on the texture of it, because what was moving through my chest in that moment needed somewhere to go that wasn't my face. "Grandpa Robert," Lily said, her voice coming out smaller than usual. "I'm sorry." "Come here," I said. She climbed off her chair and into the space beside me, and I put my arm around her shoulders and held on, and she pressed her face into the lapel of my 2009 Navy suit and breathed in the unsteady way of a child working very hard not to cry in a room full of adults. "That was not your fault," I said into the top of her head. "Not a single part of it." Preston had already moved away, back toward the main table, back toward the room that was his. Lily pulled back and looked up at me, cheeks flushed, eyes wet at the corners. Then, with the sudden practicality of a child shifting gears, she reached up and tucked the red recorder, still running its small light, still blinking, into the breast pocket of my jacket. The way she'd seen her father pocket his phone 100 times. A simple, unremarkable gesture. "For safekeeping," she said with great seriousness, "so nothing happens to it." I looked down at the small rectangular bulge in my pocket. "Good thinking," I said. She climbed back into her chair and straightened her green velvet dress and picked up my unused dessert spoon and looked at her reflection in it upside down and did not say another word about the photograph or the man who had taken it. Neither did I. But I sat with my hand resting over that pocket for the rest of the time I spent at that table, and I could feel faintly through the fabric of the jacket Eleanor had always liked on me the small, steady weight of a thing that was still running. Lily left 20 minutes after Preston took the photograph. She hugged me once more, hard, the way she hugged everything, like she was trying to leave an impression. And then a woman in a black uniform appeared at the edge of the serving corridor and said, "Miss Lily's bath was at 8:30, and Lily looked at me with the expression of someone being recalled from somewhere she'd rather stay. "I'll see you at Christmas morning," she said, with the certainty of a child who has not yet learned that plans fall apart. "You will," I said. She retrieved her recorder from my breast pocket. I'd forgotten it was there, and tucked it under her arm and followed the woman in black back toward the main staircase without looking back. The way Eleanor never looked back either when she was sure of where she was going. I sat alone at the small table for another 10 minutes. The party moved and breathed around me, entirely indifferent. A waiter refilled my water without making eye contact. From the main room came the sound of laughter, pitched at the frequency of people performing enjoyment for each other, and the string quartet had moved on to something I didn't recognize. Then Diane appeared. She came around the serving station quickly, the way she moved when she didn't want to be seen doing something. Shoulders slightly forward, eyes checking the room before settling on me. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, and her hair was up in the style Eleanor had always called the one that means she's trying, and she looked underneath all of it exhausted in the specific way of a person who has been performing since 6 o'clock. "Dad." She sat in Lily's vacated chair and leaned in, keeping her voice at a level that wouldn't carry. "You should circulate a little. It looks strange you sitting back here all evening." "I was invited to sit here, Diane," I said. "So I'm sitting here." She pressed her lips together. That's not how it was meant. It's just the seating arrangement for tonight." I understand exactly how it was meant, I said, and I'm not making a scene about it. I'm sitting here eating my dinner and talking to your daughter. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read, guilt and relief fighting for the same square inch of real estate. She reached out and touched my hand, brief and careful. I brought you something, I said. I lifted the cherrywood box from the chair where it had been sitting all evening and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it the way people look at things they recognize but haven't seen in a while, with a kind of muscle memory of feeling. I made it for Lily, I said. Open it. Diane lifted the lid. The wooden horse sat in its square of green felt, small, solid, the grain of the wood catching the light from the candle on the table. She ran her thumb along the curve of the mane, the individual carved strokes. Her breath came in just slightly. Dad, she said, you made this. October and November, I said. Every evening. She was still looking at it when Preston arrived. He came from the direction of the fireplace, a glass of something amber in one hand, moving with the easy authority of a man for whom every room has already arranged itself correctly. He stopped behind Diane's shoulder and looked down at the box. What is that? Robert made it for Lily, Diane said, and I noticed she used my name instead of Dad, the way she did in Preston's company when she was managing two conversations at once. Preston set his glass on the table, without being invited to, and reached into the box. He picked up the wooden horse and held it at arm's length, turning it once the way you'd inspect something at a yard sale, a whittled toy. His voice had the particular flatness of a verdict. You brought a hand-carved wooden toy to this house. Lily has an entire room of handcrafted imports, Mr. Calloway educational pieces, European design. This looks like something off a job site. He turned it again. The edges here. She could scratch herself. The edges are sanded to 80 grit, I said. Then to 220. I've been working with wood for 40 years. Preston looked at me over the horse with an expression that made very clear what he thought of 40 years of working with wood. Then he dropped it. Not placed. Not set down. Dropped it into the waste bin beside the fireplace hearth 4 feet away without looking at where it landed. The sound it made was small and final. Diane's hand went to her mouth. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement near the kitchen doorway. A woman in a gray uniform, heavy-set, with the unhurried competence of someone who had been working in this house long enough to know when something mattered. She had been arranging serving trays on the corridor shelf. Now she was very still, watching the waste bin. Watching me. Then without a word, without drawing a single eye in that room, she crossed to the hearth, reached into the bin, and slipped the wooden horse into the front pocket of her apron. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to her trays. I stood up. Not fast. Not with shaking hands. The way you stand up from a piece of work when you're finished with it, deliberate, complete. Dad, Diane said, her voice dropping into something urgent and low. Please, not here, please don't. I'm not making a scene, I said. I'm leaving. I looked at Preston. He had retrieved his glass and was watching me with the calm of a man who has never once had to wonder whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. I've worked in a lot of homes, Mr. Vance, I said. Built some of them myself from the foundation up. I have never once, not once, been in a home where the host threw away a man's gift in front of his face and called it hospitality. Preston opened his mouth. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, put it on, and buttoned the front button. The one Eleanor had always said made the suit look intentional instead of accidental. Then I walked out. Not fast. Not looking back at Diane's face, because if I looked at Diane's face, I would stop walking, and I was not going to stop walking. Behind me, the string quartet finished their piece. Someone at the main table laughed. The December air outside hit me like a hand on the chest, cold, immediate, honest. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing it in. Then I heard the door open behind me and the sound of heels on the stone steps, and I knew without turning around that whatever came next, it was not going to be Preston. Penn Station on Christmas Eve smells like soft pretzels and diesel exhaust, and the particular desperation of people trying to get somewhere before midnight. I had taken the one train down from 59th Street, standing the whole way with my jacket buttoned and my hands in my pockets, and my eyes on the middle distance, the way you learn to look on a New York subway when you don't want to invite conversation. The car was half full of people, carrying shopping bags and instrument cases, and the general weight of an evening that hadn't gone the way they'd planned. I fit right in. The main hall of Penn Station opened up around me, low ceilings, fluorescent light, the departure board clicking through its updates with the indifference of a system that runs on schedule regardless of what any particular human being is going through. The Long Island Railroad to Merrick had a train at 8:52. 14 minutes. I bought a coffee from the kiosk near the LIRR entrance. Black, no sugar, in a paper cup that said Happy Holidays on the side in 3 fonts, and stood in front of the departure board drinking it and thinking about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I am thinking about everything. Eleanor and I had stood in this exact station in the spring of 1987, heading back to Long Island after a dinner with her sister in the city. We'd missed the 10:15 and had to wait 40 minutes on a bench near the newsstand. She'd bought a crossword puzzle magazine and done half of it in the time we waited, reading clues out loud and accepting suggestions from me, even when my suggestions were wrong, which they usually were. "You're a very bad crossword partner," she'd told me. "I know," I said. "I'm better at other things." "You are," she'd agreed and leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in Penn Station on a Tuesday night with no money and a missed train, and I had been without question the happiest I had ever been in my life up to that point. I was thinking about that bench when I heard my name. Dad. Diane came through the crowd fast, her coat half on one button, done wrong, her hair starting to come down from the arrangement it had been in all evening. She had her phone in her hand, and her eyes were scanning the board, and then they found me, and she came straight at me without slowing down. "Dad, stop. Just stop." "I'm not moving," like I said. "I'm drinking my coffee." She stopped 2 feet away, chest rising and falling from the walk, or the run, or the thing that was happening behind her eyes, which I recognized as the expression she'd had at 11 years old, when she was trying to decide whether to tell me something she'd broken. "Do you have any idea," she said, "what you just did in there?" I said what I had to say and I left. That's all I did. "That's all you—" She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead, a gesture so like Eleanor when she was frustrated that my chest contracted sharply. "Preston is furious, Dad. His mother is furious. Do you understand what that means for me, for my life?" "Tell me what it means," I said. "It means I have spent 3 years learning how to exist in that world. How to talk, what to wear, what to say, and what absolutely never to say, and you walk in there and you throw it all away in one night because your feelings got hurt." The coffee cup was warm in my hand. I held on to it. "My feelings," I said. "Yes." Her voice cracked on the word, and she pushed through it. "Preston threw away a toy, Dad. It was a toy. And you made it into a hole, you made it into this big thing, and now I'm the one who has to fix it. I'm always the one who has to fix it." I looked at my daughter. She was 34 years old, and she was standing in Penn Station on Christmas Eve with her coat buttoned wrong, and underneath the fury and the fear she was shaking, I could see it in her hands, in the way she was gripping her phone like it was something solid in a room that had stopped having solid things in it. "He threw away something I made," I said, with my hands, for Lily, in front of my face. I know. He took your mother's photograph and gave it to a waiter like it was trash on a table. Dad, and I sat in a corner of that house all evening while your wife's mother explained to me very politely that I didn't belong at the main table. I kept my voice level, not low, level. I didn't make it a big thing, Diane. It already was one. I just said so out loud. She stared at me. Her eyes were bright and wet and angry, and something underneath the anger that I didn't have a name for yet. Then she straightened her spine, and her chin came up, and she said the thing she had come here to say. You have two choices, Dad. You go back tonight and you apologize. To Preston, to his mother, to everyone at that table. Sincerely. Not the way you sometimes apologize where the words are technically correct, but your whole face says something different. She held my gaze. Or you go home and you stay there, alone. Because I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep being the bridge between your world and mine. Your pride is not worth my marriage. The departure board clicked. The 8:52 to Merrick appeared in white letters. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Looked for Eleanor in her face, in the line of her jaw, the set of her eyes. Found traces. Not enough. When was the last time you apologized to me? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, I said. I dropped the paper cup in the trash can beside the kiosk, the one that said Happy Holidays in 3 fonts, and I picked up my box and I walked toward the LIRR entrance. She called after me once. Just my name the way she'd called it as a little girl when she didn't get what she wanted and couldn't understand why. The sound of it moved through me like a cold current, and I kept walking, because some things you feel all the way to the bone and still don't stop for. The train doors closed at 8:52 exactly as scheduled. I sat by the window and watched the station disappear behind me, and I thought about two choices. About the particular architecture of an ultimatum, how it always presents itself as a wall, when what it actually is, if you look at it long enough, is a door you haven't tried yet. Somewhere between Penn Station and the first long stretch of dark track heading east, I began to think about a third option. The house on Merrick Road looked exactly the same as when I'd left it that afternoon. That was the hardest part. Not the quiet I had learned the quiet. 3 years of it had taught me where it lived in every room, which corners it gathered, and how it changed texture between morning and night. No, the hardest part was that the house looked entirely unchanged, and I had just come from an evening that had changed something I couldn't yet name, and the two facts sat beside each other without resolving. The porch light was on. I always left it on when I went out after dark, an old habit from when Diane was a teenager, and I wanted her to know that someone was paying attention to when she came home. The wreath on the front door was the one Eleanor had made 3 Christmases ago from pine branches off the tree in the backyard, bound with red wire she'd bought at the hardware store. It had dried out and gone a little brown at the edges, but I hadn't taken it down, and I wasn't going to. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, the same hook it had lived on for 22 years, and stood in the entryway for a moment, with my hand still on the collar, feeling the wool still cold from outside. The kitchen light was the one I'd left on. I went in and sat down at the table without taking off my shoes, which Eleanor would have had a firm and immediate opinion about, and I sat there in the particular stillness of a house that knows it's holding only one person. Then my hand went to my jacket on the hook. Something was pulling at the back of my mind, something small and specific, the way a splinter makes itself known, not with pain, but with the persistent suggestion of wrongness. I went back to the entryway, reached into the breast pocket of the jacket, and pulled out the red plastic recorder, Lily's reporter recorder. She'd taken it back at the table, I'd thought. But here it was, she must have put it back again when she hugged me goodbye. Or I'd imagined her taking it. The evening had been full of things I'd tracked imperfectly. The small red light on the side was not blinking, which meant it had either run out of battery or stopped recording at some point. I turned it over in my hands. It was the size of a matchbox light as a question. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it the way you look at something you're not sure you want to open. Then I pressed play. The first sounds were the ones I expected, the ambient noise of the Vance party crystal and conversation, and the distant string quartet, slightly muffled by the fabric of my jacket pocket. I could hear the moment Lily had put it there, the rustling, and then the change in sound quality, voices becoming more immediate. I heard myself talking to Lily. Heard her say I miss her even though I only met her twice. Heard my own voice rougher than I expected, saying, missing someone isn't about how many times you met them. I pressed my thumb hard against the edge of the table. Then came the sounds of the party shifting. The recording had continued after Lily left, after Preston threw the horse, after I walked out. The device had stayed in my pocket through the train ride, through Penn Station, through the whole ride home. And somewhere in the middle of all that ambient noise, about 40 minutes into the recording, there were two voices I recognized speaking in what they clearly believed was a private corner of a very large room. Preston's voice first, lower than his public voice, clipped. She signed the Merrick Road property transfer papers last spring, Mother. She thought they were insurance update forms. Gloria. Measured unhurried, the voice of a woman making a grocery list. And the LLC, his contractor's license, already in motion. Once the transfer clears, we won't need his name attached to anything. The bank will use the LLC, not him. A pause. The sound of a glass being set down. And Diane knows nothing about this. Diane knows what I need her to know. I stopped the recording. I sat at the kitchen table in the house on Merrick Road on Christmas Eve, and I looked at the watercolor painting Eleanor had done of the backyard in the summer of 2016, the one hanging on the wall beside the refrigerator, the one where she'd gotten the light wrong on the oak tree but the roses exactly right. And I breathed in and out slowly and deliberately, the way I had learned to breathe on job sites when something structural had failed, and panic was the one thing that would make it worse. My hands were flat on the table. I looked at them. The knuckle on my right index finger broken in 1994 on a framing job in Huntington and healed slightly crooked. The callus on my left palm from 40 years of tool handles. These hands had built things, solid things that were still standing. They were not shaking. I got up, went to the counter, and picked up the phone. It rang twice. Frank. His voice came through groggy but sharpening fast, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years in construction management and had learned that calls after midnight were never about nothing. It's past 12. What happened? I need you to come over in the morning, I said. 9 o'clock. Bring the number for that attorney you used in 2009. The business one. A beat. Frank processing. How bad are we talking? I looked at the recorder on the table, at Eleanor's watercolor on the wall, at the kitchen that had held 30 years of this family's life and was about to hold something it had never held before, which was the beginning of a plan. Bad enough that I'm glad I found out tonight, I said, instead of 6 months from now. 9 o'clock, Frank. I'll have coffee. I set the phone down. Outside, the snow that had been threatening all evening had finally started. I could see it in the porch light, through the kitchen window, coming down soft and steady and completely indifferent to what was happening inside this house. I did not go to bed. I sat at that kitchen table with the recorder and my two hands, and the particular clarity that arrives sometimes when something you half knew becomes something you fully know, and I began to think very carefully about the third option. Frank DeLuca lived in a two-family house in Woodside, Queens that he had bought in 1993 and renovated entirely by himself over the following 4 years, one room at a time on weekends and holidays, and the occasional sick day he had never actually been sick enough to justify. The kitchen was the last room he'd finished, and the one he was most proud of, which you could tell because it was also the most lived in. The countertops, worn smooth in the places he used them most, the cabinet above the stove blackened slightly from 30 years of Sunday gravy, a corkboard beside the refrigerator so dense with phone numbers and business cards and takeout menus that it had stopped being organizational and become something closer to archaeological. Frank had the coffee ready when I got there. He always had the coffee ready. In 38 years of friendship, I had never once arrived at Frank DeLuca's house to find the coffee not already made, and I had stopped remarking on it the way you stop remarking on the sun coming up. He was a big man, Frank, broad through the shoulders, in the way that doesn't come from a gym, but from decades of actual physical work, with hands that looked like they'd been borrowed from someone larger and never quite returned. He had retired from site management 4 years ago, and he looked, as he always did, faintly impatient about it. He set a mug in front of me and sat down across the table and said nothing, which was how Frank expressed that he was ready to listen. I put the recorder on the table between us. "Play it from the 40-minute mark," I said. He did. He listened to Preston and Gloria the same way he listened to everything important, completely still, eyes on the middle distance, the mug held in both hands, and not moving. When it finished, he set the recorder down and looked at me. "They forged your signature on the LLC paperwork," he said. "That's not a civil matter, Robert. In New York State, forging a signature on a legal document, especially a business ownership transfer, that's a Class D felony. Criminal, not civil. You're not filing a lawsuit. You're filing a crime report." "I know. And the property transfer, if Diane signed what she thought were insurance forms, and they were actually deed transfer documents, that's fraud in the inducement. The transfer is voidable, meaning a court can declare it never happened." I figured something like that. Frank looked at me steadily. "So what do you want to do?" "I want to do it right," I said. "Not fast, right. There's a difference. There always is." He nodded once, pulled his phone off the counter, and scrolled to a number. "Carol Simmons. She handled the Hartwell commercial dispute for me in 09 business and real estate sharp as they come. I'll call her office when they open after the holiday. January 2nd at the earliest, more likely the 6th. "The 6th works," I said. Frank set the phone face down on the table. He refilled both our mugs without asking. Outside, the Queen's morning was doing what Queen's mornings do in late December, gray, purposeful, entirely uninterested in sentiment. We had been sitting there for 20 minutes, talking through what Carol would need and in what order, when my phone rang. "Unknown number, New York area code." I picked up. "Mr. Calloway." A woman's voice measured careful with the particular tension of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say and is still not sure they're going to say it. "My name is Ruth Hadley. I work for the Vance family. I apologize for calling on the holiday, but I wasn't sure I would have the nerve again if I waited." Frank's eyebrows went up. I held up a hand. "I'm listening, Mrs. Hadley," I said. A breath. Then, "What happened at that dinner on Christmas Eve? What they have been doing to your paperwork? Mr. Calloway, I have documentation. I made copies 6 months ago because something felt wrong, and I didn't know what else to do with them, and I didn't know who to trust." Her voice steadied as she went. "I have the LLC amendment forms with what appears to be your signature. I have internal correspondence between Mr. Vance and his attorney about the Merrick Road transfer. I have a copy of the document your daughter signed, and I have the original insurance form it was presented alongside so you can see exactly how it was framed to her." My hand tightened around the phone. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" I asked. "Why not 6 months ago?" The pause that followed was not evasion. It was the pause of someone deciding how honest to be. "My son works construction," she said. "He's been running his own crew in Brooklyn for 9 years. Last spring, Mr. Vance met him at a site walkthrough. My son didn't know who he was, and Mr. Vance didn't know whose mother I was. In front of 6 men, Mr. Vance told my son that men like him don't build things, they just move dirt." Another pause, shorter. "I went home that evening and made the copies. I've been waiting for the right moment ever since." Frank was watching me from across the table, reading my face the way he'd been reading it for nearly 4 decades. "How did you get my number, Mrs. Hadley?" I asked. "I called the Callaway construction office this morning," she said. "I had to try 3 times. The first 2 times I hung up before anyone answered. The third time, a man named Eddie picked up and gave me this number when I told him it was urgent. I hope that was all right." "It was," I said. "Can you send me what you have?" "I already scanned everything," she said, and I heard in her voice the relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy and has finally found somewhere to put it down. "I can send it to whatever address you give me within the hour." I looked at Frank. He was already tearing a piece of paper off the notepad he kept beside the corkboard, writing down his fax number, because Frank DeLuca was the last man in Queens who still had a working fax machine, and he would defend that decision to his grave. After I hung up, Frank slid the paper back across the table toward himself and looked at it. "A woman inside the house," he said. "For 11 years, I said. Frank exhaled through his nose the sound he made when something had exceeded even his expectations of how a situation could develop. "Robert," he said, "I think you need to call Carol Simmons yourself, today. Don't wait for the 6th. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. It was still warm. "Not today," I said. "I want everything Ruth sends us in hand first. I want to walk into that office with the full picture, not a piece of it. Carol charges $400 an hour, and I'm not paying her to watch me organize my thoughts." Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached over and refilled my mug a 3rd time. "You haven't slept," he said. "No." "You going to—" I looked out the kitchen window at the gray December morning settling over Woodside. Somewhere across the borough in a limestone building on the Upper East Side, Preston Vance was waking up on Christmas morning believing he had handled everything correctly. "Not yet," I said. The 11 days between Christmas and January 6th were the quietest I had spent in years. Not peaceful quiet. There is a difference. Peaceful is what you feel when things have resolved. Quiet is what you feel when you are in the middle of deciding something large, and the deciding requires every available frequency of your attention. Mrs. Ruth's documents arrived by email the morning of December 27th, 14 scanned pages organized by date, labeled in the careful handwriting of a woman who understood that documentation was only useful if someone else could follow it. Frank printed everything at the office supply place on Northern Boulevard, and we spread it across his kitchen table and went through it page by page, twice the way we used to go through blueprints on a big job before the first nail went in. What Ruth had sent was thorough. The LLC amendment form, Robert A. Callaway's signature in ink, that was too consistent, too upright. None of the slight leftward lean his signature had carried since a tendon injury in 1997. The Merrick Road transfer document with Diane's signature on the 3rd page, and the innocuous-looking insurance form it had been paper-clipped to when she signed. Internal emails between Preston and his attorney, 3 of them dated over 6 months, mapping out the transfer sequence with the confidence of men who did not expect to be read. I did not feel anger looking at those pages. I felt something colder and more useful, which was certainty. I spent the remaining days writing. not letters, a list. Yellow legal pad pencil, 8 items numbered and specific. The same way I had always written project specifications, no unnecessary words, no ambiguity, nothing left to interpretation. By January 5th, the list was done. I read it back 3 times, changed 2 words, and put it in my jacket pocket. Carol Simmons kept her office on the 31st floor of a building on 6th Avenue that had a lobby with the particular self-importance of a place that charged by the hour. Her assistant brought me in at 2 o'clock exactly. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, dark-haired with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the focused stillness of someone who had learned to listen to the whole sentence before forming the next question. She shook my hand the way people shake hands when they mean it, firm, brief, and done. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "Frank speaks well of you. Sit down." I sat. I put the yellow legal pad on the desk between us. She looked at it, then at me. "Walk me through it." 8 items, I said. "In order." She uncapped her pen. The first item was the LLC. I told her about the recording, the forged signature the amendment filed without my knowledge. She stopped me twice to clarify dates. When I finished, she said, "Unauthorized use of a business entity plus signature forgery, that's criminal exposure under New York Penal Law Section 170. Class D felony. We document it, we submit it to the DA's office with the recording and Ruth's copies. That runs parallel to everything else on its own track." "Understood," I said. Item 2. Item 2 was the Merrick Road transfer. She asked to see Ruth's copies. I slid them across. She read without speaking, turned to the email chain, read that too. Then she took off her reading glasses entirely and set them on the desk. "The transfer is voidable," she said. "Fraud in the inducement your daughter signed under a material misrepresentation of what she was signing. A New York court can unwind it. The property reverts to your name as though the transfer never occurred." She paused. "Do you want to pursue that?" "No," I said. "I want to sell it." Item 3, Jim Parrish for an off-market sale. No listing, no sign, quick close. She wrote that down without comment. Item 4 was the will. I told her I wanted everything personal, the proceeds from the house, the remaining business assets, the personal accounts directed into a charitable trust. The Eleanor Calloway Foundation, supporting elderly individuals without family support networks. I wanted it structured as a revocable living trust to avoid probate, with a notarized pour-over will as the backup document. Carol looked up. "Nothing to Diane." "There's a letter," I said. "Sealed. You'll hold it. You'll know when." She wrote that down. Item 5 was the LLC itself. I wanted Frank named as sole owner of record effective January 7th. "Already filed," I told her. She confirmed she'd verify the state records. Item 6 was the submission to the New York State Education Department Office of the Professions, the Architecture License Review Board. The recording, the forged documents, Ruth's internal correspondence. Carol said she'd handled a professional license complaint before and knew the submission format. "It will move slowly," she said. "These boards are thorough, which means unhurried." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. "I just need it done correctly." Item 7 was a personal account transfer, moving my liquid assets out of the joint account I'd maintained since Eleanor's death and into a personal account in my name, only effective end of January. Then I set down my pen. "There's an 8th item," I said. Carol waited. "A 529 college savings plan," I said. "In the name of Lily Vance, 7 years old, Preston Vance's daughter from his first marriage." I kept my voice even. "I want Mrs. Ruth Hadley named as custodian. I want the custodianship changed to require court approval so it can't be altered without a judge signing off. And I want the contribution amount to be enough that it matters regardless of what happens to the Vance family finances." Carol set her pen down. looked at me over the desk with the measured attention of someone recalibrating. "She's not your biological grandchild," she said. "No," I said, "she's not." "Then why?" I thought about a small girl in a green velvet dress, pulling a collar she couldn't stand, recording the sound of a party she'd already decided wasn't happy enough. Recording the fireplace. Recording the soup boiling. Recording things nobody else thought to save. Because she's the only person in that house, I said, who treated me like I was worth something. That counts. In my experience, it counts for quite a lot. Carol held my gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "And Diane," she said again. Beyond the letter, I looked at the yellow legal pad. 8 items. Everything I had spent 40 years building redirected in 8 numbered lines. "Diane gets the chance to figure out who she is without me making it easy," I said. "That's more than most people get. It might be the most useful thing I've ever given her." Carol wrote for another minute. Then she looked up. "I'll have the trust documents drafted by the 10th, she said. "The will amendment by the 13th. Everything notarized and filed before you need it to be." "January 14th, I said. She didn't ask why. She just wrote it down. Eleanor used to say that a home is not the walls. She said it first in 1989, when we were talking about whether to add a second bathroom to the Merrick Roadhouse or put the money into the business instead. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched yet, looking out the window at the backyard oak tree that was still thin enough then to see through. And she said it the way she said things she had already decided were true, not as an argument, but as a fact she was sharing. "A home is not the walls, Robert. It's the decisions made inside them. We put the money into the business." The oak tree grew. I thought about that on the morning of January 12th as I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at 30 years of decisions stacked up around me, the watercolor on the wall, the calendar with Eleanor's handwriting still on it, the drawer that stuck in cold weather because the wood had expanded and I had never gotten around to planning it down. Every room in this house was a decision. Some of them were good ones. I had 2 days. I worked the way I always worked on a job, with a fixed deadline, methodically, without sentiment in the doing of it, saving the sentiment for after. The bedroom first. I kept 3 things: the photograph of Eleanor on the front steps in July 2018, the Bible she'd kept on her nightstand with the broken spine because she'd opened it to the same passages so many times the binding had given up trying to hold, and the small wooden box of her jewelry that I had not opened in 3 years and was not going to open now. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the tools in the garage, I had arranged with Frank. Some to storage, some to the Salvation Army on Hillside Avenue, some to the guys at the yard who had worked for me since before some of them were old enough to drive. The box took most of the second day. It was cherrywood. I had bought the board at the lumberyard in Bethpage in November, before any of this, because I had been planning to make a small chest for Lily and had not yet decided on the dimensions. The grain was tight, and even the kind that takes a finish well. I cut the pieces on the afternoon of January 12th, jointed the edges, glued them up, and left them overnight with clamps. In the morning, I unclamped everything, fitted the lid, cut the hinge mortises with a chisel, set the brass hinges, and sanded the whole thing through. 80 grit, then 120, then 220, finishing by hand with the grain. Then I took my carving knife and cut Eleanor's name into the lid. Not printed her actual signature, the one I had watched her write on 37 years of birthday cards and Christmas tags, and the back of the Polaroids she took of everything, because she believed photographs should be labeled while you still remembered what was in them. I had memorized the shape of it. Inside the box, I placed 3 things: The wedding photograph from 1981, Harold and Eleanor outside St. Bartholomew's Rice in her hair, both of us young enough that I barely recognized myself. Her wedding ring wrapped in the square of white flannel I had kept it in since the hospital. And the USB drive. The video I recorded in the kitchen that evening just before dark. One candle on the table. No script. I had tried writing one, and thrown it away, because it sounded like a man performing a version of himself he thought was appropriate for the occasion. And Eleanor had never had patience for that kind of thing, and neither did I. I sat down in front of the camera, and I talked to my daughter. Diane, if you're watching this, you found the house empty, and you found this box. I want you to understand something, and I need you to hear it straight. I am not leaving because I'm angry. I've been angry tonight, and it passed the way it always does. I'm leaving because I heard something in your voice at Penn Station that told me I had become a problem you were managing, a burden you were accounting for, and a father shouldn't be those things to his daughter, not if he has any say in the matter. I stopped, started again. The joint account closes at the end of January. After that, you'll need to stand on your own. I know that sounds hard. It is hard. Your mother did hard things every day of her life, and she did them without making anyone feel guilty for the hardship. And she raised you, so I know you have it in you. I've always known that. I stopped again. The candle threw unsteady light across the kitchen. The box is for you. Everything in it is yours. That's all I have to say for now, except this. Whatever you decide to do next, whatever version of yourself you decide to be when nobody's watching and there's no audience to perform for, I hope you choose the real one. Your mother always did. It made her the finest person I ever knew. I saved the file, transferred it to the USB, placed the USB in the box on top of the folded flannel, closed the lid over Eleanor's name. Then I carried the box to the kitchen table and set it in the exact center between the two place settings I had not bothered to clear because clearing them had felt in some way I couldn't fully articulate, like giving something up that I wasn't ready to give up yet. Frank came at 7 with the truck. He came inside and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the box on the table and at the watercolor on the wall and at the calendar with Eleanor's handwriting, and he did not say anything for a moment, which from Frank was the equivalent of a long speech. "You good," he said finally. "Ask me in a year," I said. He picked up one end of the dresser. I picked up the other. We carried it out to the truck without another word, because that was how Frank and I had always worked best, side by side. Both of us pulling the same weight, not needing to talk about it, to know it was being shared. I went back inside one last time. The kitchen was empty except for the box and the watercolor and the stuck drawer and 30 years of decisions made inside 4 walls that were just walls now. I turned off the light. Frank picked me up at 5:15 in the morning. He pulled up to the curb on Merrick Road in the dark headlights cutting through the January cold, and I was already outside with the canvas duffel on the front step because I had not slept, and there was no point pretending otherwise. The bag was the green one I had bought in 1994 for a job in Syracuse that ran 3 weeks longer than the contract said it would, a bag I had packed and unpacked so many times that the zipper pull had been replaced twice, and the left shoulder strap had a repair sewn in black thread that didn't quite match the original green. Frank looked at the bag, looked at me. "That's all you're taking," he said. It was not a question. "That's all I need," I said. He put it in the back without further comment, and we drove through Long Island in the dark. The way we had driven to job sites for 30 years, Frank, with both hands on the wheel, radio low on a news station. Neither of us was actually listening to the particular comfortable silence of men who have run out of things they need to say to each other and arrived on the other side of that at something better. The Belt Parkway was clear at that hour. The city lights came up on the left as we crossed into Queens. The skyline doing what it always did in the dark, glittering with the complete indifference of something too large to notice any particular departure. I had been through JFK enough times to move through it without thinking. Check-in bag drop security, the long corridor to Terminal 4, with its particular smell of recycled air, and the coffee that was always slightly burned no matter which kiosk you bought it from. I bought a cup anyway, black no sugar, and stood in front of the departures board and found my flight. Key West International, connecting through Miami. Boarding at 7:45. I had booked it 11 days ago, the morning after I left Carol's office, sitting at Frank's kitchen table with the yellow legal pad still in front of me and the coffee going cold. I had looked at the screen for a long time before I clicked the button that said one way. Not because I was uncertain, because clicking it meant something had become real that had previously only been decided, and those are different things. I found a seat near the gate, set the duffel between my feet, and held the coffee cup in both hands. Eleanor had always wanted to go to Key West. She'd brought it up 3 times over the years, once in 2003, when we'd seen a travel piece about it in a magazine at the dentist's office, and she'd torn out the page and kept it in her purse for 6 months. Once in 2011, when Diane had mentioned a friend going for spring break, and Eleanor had said completely seriously that she didn't see why spring break was exclusively for people under 25. And once in 2019, 8 months before the diagnosis, when we'd been sitting on the back porch on a September evening, and she'd said out of nowhere, the way she said things that had been sitting in her mind for a while, "Robert, we should go to Key West." "We should," I said. "Not someday. Actually go." "All right," I said. "When?" She had turned to look at me with the expression that meant she was deciding whether I was being agreeable or actually agreeing, which with me were not always the same thing. "Next spring," she said. "We've earned it." We had not gone the next spring. The diagnosis came in February, and the springs after that were organized around different things, and then there were no more springs, and Key West stayed in the category of things we had meant to do and run out of time for a category that by the end had grown larger than I liked to look at directly. I was going now, not as a consolation, not as the kind of gesture people make when they are trying to heal something by symbolically completing it. I was going because it was warm, and I had never lived somewhere warm, and because Eleanor had wanted to go, and because I was 65 years old, and I had spent those 65 years building things for other people, buildings, companies, a family, and it seemed reasonable finally to build something for myself. At 7:20, I took out my phone. The message took me 4 tries to get right, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I kept writing more than was necessary, and the thing about important messages is that they should only be as long as the truth requires. I typed, "I found the 3rd option, Diane. I hope one day you find yours." "Dad," I read it twice. Then I sent it. 37 seconds later, the phone rang. Diane's name on the screen, white letters, her contact photo. The one I had taken at Thanksgiving 4 years ago, her laughing at something Frank had said, her head tipped back, and in that photo, for just a moment, she looked so much like her mother that I had made it her contact photo without telling her why. The phone rang. I looked at her face on the screen, that laughing, unguarded face from 4 years ago, and I felt something move through my chest that was not anger and not grief, and was not something I had a clean word for, something that lived in the space between loving a person completely and understanding that love is not always enough to make them ready for what they need. The phone rang a 4th time. I turned it face down on my knee. It rang twice more. Then it stopped. The voicemail notification appeared. I did not listen to it. I picked up the duffel, finished the last of the cold coffee, and walked to the gate. The jetway smelled like rubber seals and recycled warmth, and the faint ghost of someone's fast food from the flight before. I handed my boarding pass to the agent, a young woman with a ponytail, who said, "Have a great flight," with the practiced cheerfulness of someone who had said it several thousand times and had not yet lost the ability to mean it. And I walked down the jetway and found my seat and put the duffel in the overhead bin and sat down by the window. Outside on the tarmac, a luggage cart moved in slow arcs through the January dark. A ground crew worker in an orange vest stood with his hands in his pockets, breath-fogging, looking up at something I couldn't see from where I was sitting. I put on my seatbelt. The plane pushed back from the gate at 7:52, 7 minutes behind schedule, which in my experience was about as close to on time as anything got. I watched the terminal lights slide past the window, watched the ground crew worker diminish and disappear, watched JFK fall away beneath us as we climbed the lights of Queens, spreading out below in their dense and indifferent grid, and then the dark water of Jamaica Bay, and then the Atlantic, and then nothing but altitude and the particular silence of a man who has stopped waiting for something and started moving towards something else instead. Somewhere below me, in a house on Merrick Road that no longer had my name on it, a cherrywood box sat on a kitchen table. Somewhere in Manhattan, a woman who loved her husband more than she loved me was waking up next to a man who did not yet know that the floor had shifted underneath everything he thought he owned. And somewhere ahead of me, 1,100 miles south, the sun was already up. Frank called me on my 4th morning in Key West. I want to be clear about the timing, because it matters what Frank told me. That morning had happened 9 days before I boarded the plane at JFK. The events he described had unfolded while I was still on Merrick Road, still packing boxes, still sitting at Carol Simmons's desk, going through 8 items on a yellow legal pad. I was hearing about them after the fact from a dock in Florida, with a pelican working the water 12 feet in front of me, and the January sun doing things to the surface of the Gulf that January sun in New York has no business doing. The first 4 days had been quiet in the way I had not experienced in years. I had rented a small place on the water through a contact of Jim Parrish's, a retired school teacher named Bet, who asked no questions, made excellent coffee, and had a porch that faced east, so the morning light came straight at you, like something that meant business. I had slept. I had eaten at the counter of a diner on Duval Street, where they knew your order by the 3rd visit. I had walked the harbor in the early mornings before the tourists arrived, which in January meant I had the whole thing to myself. I was on the dock with my 2nd cup when the phone rang. "You sleeping?" Frank said. "Like I've been doing it my whole life," I said. "What happened?" He paused the way he does when he has something to deliver and wants to get the sequence right. "Preston went to the bank on January 9th, Frank said. He had a contract on a development site in New Jersey, commercial, 7 figures. He was using Callaway Construction LLC as the credit anchor for the loan. The bank's standard procedure is to run an ownership verification on any business entity named in a credit application. And loan officer pulled the records. Callaway Construction LLC had transferred ownership to a new party of record as of January 7th. Frank's voice was even the voice of a man reporting weather. No outstanding credit lines available to third-party applicants. The officer called Preston's attorney 20 minutes after the application was submitted. I watched the pelican drop off the piling and hit the water in a clean, committed dive. "How'd he find out it was you?" I asked. "He didn't at first. He went straight to the office." Frank paused. "I was sitting at your old desk when he walked in. He looked at me the way people look at something that shouldn't be where it is." "What did he say?" Frank's voice shifted slightly, not unkind, just precise the way he got when he was quoting someone accurately. He said, "Where is Callaway?" I told him Mr. Callaway was no longer affiliated with this company and that I was the owner of record as of January 7th, and asked if there was something I could help him with. Frank let that sit for a second. He said, "This is impossible. He can't just—" And I said, "He can." He did. "Is there anything else, Mr. Vance?" I set my coffee cup down on the dock beside me. "Frank," I said, "did he understand what he'd actually done using the LLC without authorization?" "Carroll's office sent a letter to his attorney the same afternoon," Frank said. "Formal notice that the attempted use of Callaway Construction LLC as a credit instrument without documented authorization from the then owner of record constituted fraudulent misrepresentation to a financial institution. Under New York banking law, that's not a civil matter, that's a federal bank fraud exposure." His attorney called back within 2 hours. "What did Carroll say?" "Carroll said she'd be happy to discuss it further if they wanted to put something in writing." Frank made the sound he makes when something has satisfied him at a deep structural level, a short exhale through the nose like a joint settling into place. "They did not put anything in writing." "And the New Jersey project?" "That's where it compounds," Frank said. "I'd already sent notice to the material supplier Hendricks Supply out of Newark, the one we've used for 15 years. Callaway Construction was no longer extending preferred vendor rates to any third-party projects effective January 8th. Hendricks called the site contractor the next morning. Without the Callaway rate, their materials cost on the New Jersey job goes up 32%. A beat. They were already on a fixed-price contract. The overrun comes out of the developer's margin, which is Preston. How far behind does that put the project? Minimum 4 months, accounting for the time to source a replacement supplier at market rate. And 4 months on a commercial contract of that size means penalty clauses. Frank let the number hang without stating it, because Frank understood that some numbers were more effective as implications than as figures. His attorney is going to have a very busy January. I looked out at the Gulf. A charter boat was moving along the horizon, its white hull catching the light, moving with the easy confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. "You know what the thing is," Frank said. "If he hadn't tried to use the LLC without checking, if he'd just called and asked or waited or done literally anything other than assume, none of this would have surfaced in this particular way. The forgery investigation is still moving on its own track. But this he handed us." "Pride does that," I said. "Makes people assume the ground isn't moving. You almost sound sorry for him." I thought about the wooden horse in the trash can, about Eleanor's photograph on the waiter's tray, about Diane's face at Penn Station, lit from above by the fluorescent lights, telling me my dignity wasn't worth her marriage. "No," I said. "I don't." Frank was quiet for a moment. The real kind, the kind with something in it. "There's more," he said. Diane went to the house. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold without my noticing. I drank it anyway, the way you drink something cold when you need something to do with your hands while you decide how to receive what's coming. "Tell me," I said. Frank paused on the phone the way he always does before delivering something he knows belongs in a different category than everything that came before it. A single beat just long enough to signal that what follows requires a different kind of listening. "She went the same day you flew out," he said. "January 14th, afternoon. I had not moved from the dock. The Pelican had come back to its piling. The Gulf was doing what it did every morning, going about its business with the serene indifference of something that had been here before any of us and intended to be here after." "Was Preston with her?" I asked. "He drove," Frank said. "But I want to tell you about that separately, because what happened between the two of them in that house is not the part I think you need to hear first." "Then tell me what I need to hear first." Frank settled into it the way he settled into long explanations on job sites. Chin down, voice level, the facts in order. He had been parked across the street when they arrived. Not surveilling, he had gone to drop off a set of keys for Jim Parrish's contact, the buyer's agent, who needed access for the inspection scheduled that week. Frank had pulled up to the curb and was reaching for his phone to call Jim when Diane and Preston's car came around the corner and slowed in front of the house. Preston got out first, stood on the sidewalk and looked at the house the way a man looks at a property he intends to leverage, assessing, not feeling. He tried the front door with a key from his own ring. It didn't work. He tried another. Then he called someone, spoke briefly, and 2 minutes later, a woman from Jim Parrish's office arrived with the showing key. He walked in ahead of her, Frank said. Ahead of Diane, ahead of the agent, like it was already his. I pressed my thumb hard against the side of the coffee cup. And Diane? I asked. Diane went straight to the kitchen, Frank said. I couldn't see inside from where I was parked, but the agent came back out after about 10 minutes and stood on the porch making a phone call, which told me Preston had cleared her out pretty efficiently, which meant whatever was happening inside, he'd decided he didn't need a witness for it. Frank had gotten out of his truck at that point, walked to the end of the driveway, and stood there, hands in his coat pockets, the way you stand when you're not sure if you're going to be needed and you don't want to announce yourself before you know. He heard Preston before he saw him. He came out the side door, the one off the kitchen, and he was on his phone again, louder this time. Something about calling his attorney, something about the transfer documents, whether there was a parallel filing that could supersede the sale. Frank's voice stayed even. I let him get to the end of the driveway before I said his name. What did he do? He stopped, looked at me, looked at the house, looked back at me. A pause. He said, DeLuca. Where is he? I said I didn't know, which was true enough. I knew Key West, but I didn't have an address. He said, there has to be documentation in that house. A safe, a secondary filing. I said, Mr. Vance, the property transferred to the buyer 6 days ago. If there were documents belonging to Mr. Calloway in this house, they were either removed by him or they no longer legally constitute your concern. How did he take that? He got back in the car, Frank said simply. The Pelican lifted off the piling without warning and banked left over the water, gone in 4 seconds. What about Diane? I said. She didn't come out with him. No, Frank said. She didn't. He told me she had been in the kitchen alone for close to 40 minutes after Preston left. Frank had stayed at the end of the driveway the whole time, not going in, not leaving the same thing he'd done on job sites when he knew someone inside was dealing with something that needed to be dealt with alone. When Diane came out, she was carrying the cherrywood box in both arms, pressed against her chest, the way you carry something you are not going to put down. Her eyes were red at the edges. Her coat was buttoned wrong in the same way it had been at Penn Station, Frank said, and I felt something move through my chest when he said that, a specific and unwelcome recognition. She stopped at the end of the walk, looked at Frank. Frank, she said. Her voice was level, Frank told me, not broken. Level in the way that things are level when they have just been through something that stripped away everything unnecessary. Where is he? I don't know, Frank said. He told me Key West. He didn't give me an address. Diane nodded. Once. The way someone nods when the answer is exactly what they expected, and they had needed to hear it anyway to close the question. She looked down at the box in her arms, at the name carved into the lid. Then she looked back up at Frank and said, the watercolor painting, in the kitchen. He left it. He left it, Frank confirmed. She pressed her lips together hard. Her jaw worked against something for a moment, the way a jaw works when a person is applying very deliberate pressure to the inside of their own composure. He always said that painting was bad, she said. He said she got the light wrong on the oak tree. He said that, Frank agreed. He kept it anyway. He did. Diane shifted the box in her arms, redistributing the weight. Then she walked to the car, and Frank watched her try the passenger door, find it locked, stand there for a moment, with the box in her arms and no free hand to knock on the window. She didn't knock. She stood there, box pressed to her chest, and waited. Preston unlocked it from inside after a moment. She got in. They drove away. Frank stood at the end of the driveway of the house on Merrick Road until the car turned the corner and was gone. Then he looked at the house porch light off. For the first time he could remember wreath still on the door, Eleanor's watercolor, visible through the kitchen window from where he stood, just barely the backyard oak filling the frame behind it. Then he got in his truck and called me. "She took the box," Frank said. "Good," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. I cleared my throat. "That's where it belongs." I stared at the water for a long moment. The Gulf moved the way it always moved without consulting anyone. "Frank," I said, "the painting, did you go in and get it?" "No," Frank said. "I left it, the way you left it." I thought about Eleanor standing at the kitchen counter in 2016 with a brush in her hand, squinting at the canvas, saying, the light on the oak wasn't right, and she was going to fix it tomorrow. She never did fix it. She left it on the wall anyway, because she had learned what I was still learning, that the things that aren't quite right are sometimes the ones most worth keeping. "Good," I said again. "Leave it there. Before I tell you what Diane found on that USB comment 12, so I know you're still with me. Because what she heard in that dark bedroom alone will break your heart before it puts it back together. Don't move. Note what follows contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, this is a perfect place to step away." Mrs. Ruth called me on a Tuesday evening 6 days after Frank's call. I had been expecting to hear from her, not because she had said she would call, but because I had come to understand in the weeks since Christmas that Ruth Hadley was the kind of woman who completed things. She had copied those documents. She had organized them by date. She had called me 3 times before she finally didn't hang up. Whatever she had witnessed in that apartment, she would find a way to tell me about it, because leaving it untold would have felt to a woman like her like leaving a job half-finished. I was on the porch when the phone rang. The Key West evening was doing what Key West evenings did in January, cooling just enough to remind you that winter existed somewhere, while still being the kind of warm that made you feel obscurely guilty if you'd grown up shoveling driveways. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I hope I'm not calling too late." "You're not," I said. "Tell me what you saw." She had been in the apartment the evening of January 16th, 2 days after Diane returned from Merrick Road. She had let herself in at 6 o'clock as usual, her Thursday shift, and found the apartment quieter than it should have been for 6 in the evening. Preston's coat was on the hook. His briefcase was by the door. But the main rooms were empty. The bedroom door was closed, Mrs. Ruth said. The light was on underneath it. I could hear something very faint. I thought at first it was the television. It was not the television. She had started in the kitchen the way she always started, putting things in order from the back of the apartment forward. She was wiping down the counter when she heard Preston's voice in the hallway outside the bedroom door. "What's on it? Is it the deed, the property transfer?" Silence from inside. "Diane." His voice sharpened into the register it went to when he wanted something and wasn't getting it. "Open the door." Mrs. Ruth set down her cloth, stood very still. The door opened. She couldn't see Diane's face from where she stood. The angle was wrong, but she could see Preston's. She had worked in that apartment for 3 years, and she had cataloged every expression Preston Vance was capable of, the way you catalog the moods of weather you have to live inside of. What she saw on his face when the door opened was not the expression of a man receiving information. It was the expression of a man realizing that the information was not what he needed it to be. "There's no deed," Diane said. Her voice, Mrs. Ruth told me, was the flattest she had ever heard it. Not broken, not angry. Flat in the way that something is flat after everything unnecessary has been pressed out of it. "There's nothing on there for you." "Then what?" He said goodbye. A pause. Long enough that Mrs. Ruth said she held her breath without meaning to. "That's what's on it." He said goodbye, and he said I had to learn to stand on my own. And he said, another pause shorter. He said he believed I could. Preston looked at his wife for a moment. Then he walked past her toward the living room, already pulling out his phone. Mrs. Ruth told me she did not move for a full minute after that. She stood in the kitchen with the cloth in her hand and listened to Preston in the other room, his voice low and clipped on a call to his attorney, talking about account structures and asset timelines. And she thought about her son standing on a job site in Brooklyn, while a man in an expensive coat told him he was just moving dirt. Then she heard the front door. "I went to the window," Mrs. Ruth said. Diane had gone out. She was standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, no coat January, just standing there with her arms crossed, looking up at the building like she was trying to decide something. "How long did she stand there?" I asked. "About 4 minutes," Mrs. Ruth said. Then she went to the coffee shop on the corner. I watched her go in. A pause. 20 minutes later, she came back out. She had a cup in one hand. She stopped at the ATM on the corner, the one she always uses. She put her card in. I knew what came next. "It declined," I said. "It declined," Mrs. Ruth confirmed. She stood there for a moment. Then she took out her other card, the one that's just hers, not the joint account, and she put that one in instead. Took out $60, put the card back in her wallet. "Did she seem," I started. She seemed like a woman who had just had 2 things happen to her at once and was deciding which one to feel first, Mrs. Ruth said. She stood at the ATM for maybe 30 seconds after the transaction. Then she picked up her coffee and she walked back to the building. "But she didn't go straight up." "No," Mrs. Ruth said. She sat on the front steps, in January, no coat, with her coffee, for about 15 minutes. Her voice shifted slightly, careful and deliberate. "I've worked in this building for 3 years, Mr. Calloway. I have seen Diane Vance perform composure in rooms full of people. I've seen her manage things, social situations, Preston's moods, his mother's expectations. I have never, not once, seen her just sit somewhere and let herself be in it." I pressed the heel of my palm against my eye socket, breathed through it. "And Preston?" I asked. "When did he notice the account?" "He tried to move funds that evening," Mrs. Ruth said. "The joint account had already been frozen on his end. Carol Simmons's office had filed the restriction that afternoon, effective immediately." She paused. "He called someone at 8 o'clock. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, he went to the kitchen and stood at the window for a long time." "What was he looking at?" I asked. "Nothing," Mrs. Ruth said. "That's what made it different." I sat on the porch in the Key West evening, the warm air moving slow off the water, and I thought about my daughter sitting on cold stone steps in January with a coffee cup and $60, and the particular weight of a life that had just become entirely her own responsibility. It was not a comfortable thing to think about, but it was a true one. "Mrs. Ruth," I said, "thank you for calling." "Mr. Calloway," she said. He slid papers under her door the next morning. "I thought you should know that too." I closed my eyes. "Tell me," I said. Mrs. Ruth's voice on the phone had a particular quality when she was describing something she had found difficult to witness, not softer exactly, but more deliberate the way a person speaks when they are choosing every word, because the wrong one would not be accurate enough. The papers were there when she opened her door at 7 in the morning, Mrs. Ruth said. I was in the kitchen. I heard her door open, and then I heard nothing for about 10 seconds, which is a very long time to hear nothing. I knew the sound she meant. The specific silence of someone reading something they were not ready to read. Divorce papers, I asked, though I already knew. Filed through his attorney's office. Date stamped January 20th, the same evening you and I spoke. She paused. He didn't knock. Didn't say good morning. Just put them under the door sometime between when I left the night before and when she woke up. The gulf outside my window was flat and silver in the early morning light. I had been awake since 5 the way I was most mornings now, and I had made coffee and sat at the small table by the window and watched the water come into focus as the sky lightened, and I had been thinking, as I often did in those quiet hours, about the difference between the life a person builds and the life that builds itself around them while they're not looking. Did she sign them? I asked. No, Mrs. Ruth said. She put them on the kitchen counter and she made herself breakfast, scrambled eggs. She stood at the stove and made scrambled eggs and ate them at the kitchen counter, and she did not look at the papers once while she was eating. Good, I said. She called someone after breakfast. I don't know who. She spoke for about 20 minutes in the bedroom with the door closed, and when she came out, she had written a name and a phone number on a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. Mrs. Ruth's voice held something careful in it. The name was a woman's name, an attorney. Diane had found her own lawyer. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the table and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would have been more useful than the silence. There's something else, Mrs. Ruth said. January 23rd. Tell me. She told me carefully, the way she told everything, in order without editorializing, letting the facts carry their own weight. Diane had come out of the bathroom on the morning of January 23rd and stood in the hallway. Mrs. Ruth had been polishing the side table near the entrance, the weekly task she always did on Thursdays. She looked up when she heard Diane's door open. Diane was standing in the middle of the hallway, with both hands at her sides, looking at the far wall. Not at anything on the wall. At the wall itself, the way people look at walls when what they're actually looking at is something happening inside them. She stood there for about 30 seconds, Mrs. Ruth said. Then she looked at me, and I don't know how to describe what her face did exactly, except to say it did 3 things at once, and 2 of them were things I had never seen on her face before. What were they? I asked. Fear, Mrs. Ruth said, and something that looked underneath the fear like the very beginning of something else, something that didn't have a name yet. Diane had looked at her and said, Ruth, I think I need a lawyer, not Preston's family's lawyer, mine. You said that already, Mrs. Ruth told her gently. I know. Diane pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth for a moment. I mean, I need her for something else too now. Mrs. Ruth had understood then. She didn't say so directly. She was not a woman who stated what was already clear, but she had crossed the hallway and put her hand on Diane's arm and said, Sit down, I'll make tea. They had sat at the kitchen table together for 20 minutes. 2 women in an apartment that belonged to neither of them in any way that mattered, drinking tea while the January light came through the windows and the papers on the counter sat exactly where Diane had left them. Did she say anything else? I asked. She said, Lily told me something the other day. Mrs. Ruth's voice softened at the name the way voices do when a child enters a conversation. She said her grandfather always said that figuring it out is the bravest thing a person can do. She said, brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing anyway. I put the phone down on the table for a moment. Just for a moment. Picked it back up. "What did you say?" I asked. I said, "Your father sounds like a smart man." And she said, "He is. He's also the most aggravating man I have ever known in my life." Mrs. Ruth paused. And then she laughed, just for a second. But it was a real one. I stood up from the table and walked to the porch railing, and stood there with the phone in one hand and the other hand flat on the wood, feeling the grain of it, the particular warmth of sun-heated timber that my hands had known their whole lives. My daughter was pregnant alone, 20 degrees in January Manhattan, with divorce papers on her kitchen counter and a lawyer's number written on a notepad. And she had laughed. A real one. "Mrs. Ruth," I said. "Thank you." "Mr. Calloway," she said. "There's one more thing. Preston found out 2 days later about the pregnancy." She told me how his voice changed when he came home that evening, and Diane told him not warm, not cold, but recalibrating, the way a man recalculates odds when a variable changes. "He brought flowers the next morning," Mrs. Ruth said, with a tone that made flowers sound like something to be cautious about. "He said they should work things out, for the baby." "What did Diane do with the flowers?" "She put them in a vase," Mrs. Ruth said, "on the counter, next to the divorce papers." She didn't move the papers. Frank called on a Wednesday in late February. By then, I had been in Key West for 6 weeks, and the days had taken on a shape I had not expected, not the shape of waiting, which was what I had assumed they would be, but something closer to the shape of a man remembering what he actually was, when nobody was requiring him to be anything in particular. I had found the boatyard in early February. It belonged to a man named George Brandt, 71 years old, who had been fixing commercial fishing boats on the same quarter-acre of waterfront property for 40 years, and had recently decided with the pragmatic cheerfulness of a man who has finished what he set out to do that he was ready to stop. We had negotiated over 3 mornings at the counter of the Harbor coffee shop, 2 old men who understood the value of things and did not feel the need to pretend otherwise. By the end of the 3rd morning, we had a number we both found reasonable, and a handshake that meant the same thing it had always meant when men like us shook hands. I had named it Calloway Boat Works. It was the first time my name had been on a building in 40 years that did not involve someone else's blueprint. Frank's call came while I was on my back under a 1978 Mako Center console that needed new floor stringers, the kind of work that requires a flashlight in one hand and a certain tolerance for fiberglass dust, both of which I had in adequate supply. I slid out and answered. "The board opened a formal investigation February 10th, Frank said without preamble, because Frank had never seen the point of preamble when the information was already in his hand. Carol submitted the full package, the recording Ruth's documents, the forged LLC amendment, the emails between Preston and his attorney. The investigator assigned to the case called Carol's office the following week to request supplemental documentation." "How fast is that?" I asked. Carol said she's never seen a preliminary review move that quickly. The volume of the evidence was substantial enough that they skipped the usual intake screening and went straight to formal inquiry. She said the recording alone, a licensed architect discussing fraudulent filings on tape, was enough to fast-track the suspension process. Boards move slowly on ambiguous cases. This one wasn't ambiguous. A pause. She said, and I'm quoting her exactly here, the submission was unusually clean. I told her I wasn't surprised. I sat down on an overturned bucket near the boat and looked at my hands. Fiberglass dust on both palms. The kind of work that got into the creases. "What did they find?" I said. 2 additional projects, Frank said, beyond what Ruth had documented. A commercial renovation in Tribeca in 2021, and a residential build in Westchester in 2022. Both had permitted drawings submitted under Preston's license. Both had discrepancies between the filed plans and the actual construction, the kind of discrepancies that don't happen by accident. Meaning he filed drawings for buildings he hadn't actually designed, or had designed differently than what was built. Either way, the permit filings were fraudulent. Frank's voice stayed level. The New York State Education Department Office of the Professions, they take that seriously. A licensed architect's stamp is a legal instrument. You put your stamp on something, you are personally certifying its accuracy. He stamped things that were not accurate. When did they move on it? March 4th. Formal notice of suspension pending full disciplinary hearing. His license is inactive as of that date. He cannot legally practice architecture in New York State until the board completes its review and issues a final determination. I thought about the New Jersey development project, already hemorrhaging money from the lost materials contract. Now its architect of record had a suspended license, which meant every permit filed under that license for that project was subject to review, which meant the project was not merely delayed, it was in legal jeopardy. Frank, I said, the New Jersey site, already flagged, Frank said. The developer's attorney contacted Carol's office last week. They're looking at their options. Another pause shorter. Preston's attorney has been very quiet since the suspension notice, which Carol says is usually a sign that someone is doing arithmetic and not liking the answer. How did he seem? I asked. When the notice came through, I don't know directly, but Mrs. Ruth told me. Frank stopped. Actually, I'll let her tell you that part herself. She called me after she heard. Said some things are better coming from the person who saw it. I stood up from the bucket and walked to the edge of the boatyard, where the dock extended out over the water. The afternoon light on the Gulf in late February was something I was still getting used to, the particular quality of it, the way it seemed to come from inside the water, as much as from above. Frank, I said, does it feel like enough? He was quiet for a moment, the real kind. Define enough, he said finally. He threw a toy I made into a trash can, I said. He put Eleanor's photograph on a dirty tray. He sat in that dining room and let his mother tell me 3 different ways that I didn't belong at the table. And Diane, I stopped, started again. Diane stood on that train platform and told me my dignity wasn't worth her marriage. I know, Frank said. Does it feel like enough? Frank breathed out slowly. I think, Jean, he said, that enough isn't really the question. The question is whether the people involved are going to learn something from it. A beat. Preston's losing his license. He's losing the project. He's losing the money. Whether he learns something from that is entirely his problem. Frank paused. Diane is a different story. Yeah, I said. She is. You know what Carol told me when I called her after the suspension notice came through? What? She said, tell Robert that the 8th item is the one I think about most. Frank let that sit for a second. The 529 for Lily. She said she's never had a client set one up for a child, with no biological connection, no legal obligation, no conditions attached. I looked out at the water. A pelican was working the shallows 30 feet off the dock. The same unhurried commitment it brought to everything. That's not generosity, I said. That's just math. Lily's the only one in that whole situation who didn't choose any of it. I know, Frank said. I just thought you should know Carol noticed. After I hung up, I stood on the dock for a while. The Mako under the boatyard roof still needed its floor stringers. The 1962 Chesapeake sloop I'd taken on as my first full restoration was waiting in the slip patient, as old wood always is. I went back to work. I want to tell you about Key West, not the version that ends up on postcards, but the real one. The real one smells like diesel and salt, and the particular sweetness of old wood soaking up heat it has been collecting since before you were born. It sounds like gulls working the shrimp boats at 5 in the morning, and the low complaint of dock lines in a chop, and the occasional argument between two men about the correct way to splice a rope that has been going on in various forms since maritime trade began. It looks in the early morning before the tourist traffic fills Duval Street, like a town that has decided to be exactly what it is and stopped apologizing for it somewhere around 1975. I found that restful after 65 years of apologizing for things. Callaway Boatworks occupied a quarter-acre of waterfront on the working harbor side of the island, not the pretty side, the side where things actually happened. The building was a converted fish house, corrugated metal roof, concrete floor, worn smooth by 40 years of foot traffic, and saltwater, 2 roll-up doors facing the water that I kept open from 6 in the morning until the light went. George Brandt had left behind his tools, his supplier contacts, and a handwritten list of regular customers he'd titled with a directness I appreciated, "People who pay on time." I added 3 names to that list by the end of February. The work was the same work I had always done underneath the surface differences. Measure twice. Cut once. Don't rush the joint. The materials were different: marine-grade plywood, epoxy resin, bronze fasteners. Instead of galvanized steel, the logic was identical to the logic of construction, which is the logic of making something that will hold against whatever it is asked to hold against. I was good at that. Clara ran the bakery 4 doors down from the boatyard entrance. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with the laugh of someone who had decided life was funny and intended to keep finding evidence for that position. She had appeared at the boatyard on my 3rd morning with 2 cups of coffee and the information that she had been bringing George Brandt coffee for 11 years and saw no reason to stop the practice simply because the name on the building had changed. "You look like a man who used to carry something very heavy," she said, setting a cup on my workbench without asking where I wanted it. "That's accurate," I said. "Does it still hurt?" I thought about that honestly, the way the question deserved. "Some mornings," I said. "Less than last month." "Good," Clara said. "That's how it's supposed to go." She left without asking anything else, which was exactly the right thing to do, and she came back the next morning with 2 cups, and the morning after that. And by the end of March, it had become the fixed point around which the rest of the day organized itself. Clara at 7, coffee on the workbench, 12 minutes of conversation about whatever was happening on the island, then back to work. The 1962 Chesapeake sloop arrived in late March, trailered down from a boat broker in Fort Lauderdale, who had bought it at a state auction and correctly identified it as beyond his skill set. She was a 32-foot wooden sloop lapstrake construction, white oak frames with cedar planking, a centerboard trunk that had been leaking for what the previous owner's records generously described as some time. Her name, painted on the transom in faded blue letters, was the Eleanor May. I stood in the boatyard and looked at that name for a long time. Then I said out loud to nobody in particular, "All right, if that's how it is." I bought her. The work on the Eleanor May was the most demanding I had taken on since a historic renovation job in Brooklyn Heights in 2009, the kind of project that required patience above everything else. The willingness to go slowly when slow was what the material needed. I stripped her down to the frames over 4 weeks, replaced 7 frames that had gone soft, recaulked every seam, refastened the planking with bronze ring-shank nails, and began the long process of rebuilding her from the inside out. In May, I received a letter from Carol Simmons. Brief professional, the way Carol did everything, the 529 college savings plan for Lily was fully funded and active. Mrs. Ruth Hadley had completed the custodianship documentation. Preston Vance's attorney had made 2 formal inquiries about the account. Both had been answered with the same letter citing the irrevocability of the custodian designation and the educational use restrictions on withdrawals. No further inquiries had been received. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the Eleanor May's original registration documents. That evening, I took out the notebook I had bought at the drugstore on Duval Street in February, a plain composition book, the kind that cost $2 and had no opinion about what you put in it, and I opened it to the page where I had written 3 sentences in June and stopped. I read those 3 sentences. Then I picked up the pen and kept going. I wrote for 90 minutes, crossed out, rewrote. The moths came to the work light above the bench, and the dock lines talked in the chop outside, and somewhere on the water, a boat's running lights moved slowly across the dark. And I wrote until I had 1 page that said what I meant, without saying more than that. I folded it, put it in an envelope, wrote Diane's name on the front in my best handwriting, the careful, deliberate kind I used for things that mattered. Then I put the envelope in the drawer with the letter from Carol and the Eleanor May's registration papers, and I closed the drawer. Not yet, but soon. Frank called me on a Tuesday evening in late June. He had driven out to Queens that afternoon, mentioned it the way he mentioned things he needed me to understand were not casual, which was to say he mentioned it once and then let it sit there. She came to the house, he said. Diane, this afternoon. I set down the brush I had been using on the Eleanor May's transom and sat on the edge of the dock. Tell me, I said. She had come alone. No, Preston Frank made that clear before anything else because he understood that the presence or absence of Preston Vance changed the meaning of everything that followed. She had taken the Q train from Astoria, walked the 4 blocks from the station, and knocked on Frank's door at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in June with her hair pulled back and no makeup, and a light in her eyes that Frank described after a pause, in which I could hear him searching for the right word as new. She's showing, Frank said. 6 months. She looked like herself, Robert. Not the version she was at that dinner in December. The version from before. My hand tightened on the phone. Frank had opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Diane had come in, sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Frank and I had listened to that recording 6 months ago, and looked at him directly. I know you know where he is, she said. I'm not asking you to tell me. I just need you to give him a message. I'm listening, Frank said. Tell him I filed for divorce in May, with my own attorney. Preston contested it. His lawyer sent 3 letters. My lawyer answered all 3. She kept her eyes on Frank's. The filing is moving through the court. It'll be finalized before the baby comes. Frank nodded. Tell him I moved out in May too, before the filing. 1 bedroom in Astoria above a laundromat on 31st Street. The dryers run until 10 o'clock on weeknights, and you can hear them through the floor. A pause. It's the best sleep I've had in 3 years. Frank told me he almost smiled at that. Almost. Tell him I have a job, Diane continued. At a flower shop in Woodside. Tuesday through Saturday, 7 to 4. It doesn't pay what I was used to. She looked down at the table for a moment, then back up. It pays enough. I'm learning the difference. Frank waited, and tell him I'm sorry. Her voice didn't break on it. Frank was specific about that, because he knew I would want to know. Not because I need anything from him. Not because I want him to come back and fix something. Just because it's true and I should have said it at Penn Station when I had the chance and I didn't. And I've thought about that every day since. Frank looked at her for a long time. The way he looks at things, he is deciding whether to trust. He told me to tell you something, Frank said finally. He said when you're ready to stand on your own 2 feet, you'll know it. And when you know it, so will he. Diane held that for a moment. Then, is he all right? He's better than all right. She nodded, pressed her lips together, stood up. Then she turned back at the door. Frank. the wooden horse he carved for Lily. Her voice changed on Lily's name, softened the way voices do when the person being named is someone you are trying to protect. Preston threw it in the trash at the party. Mrs. Ruth picked it up before the staff cleared it. She gave it to Lily the next morning. A beat. Lily sleeps with it. Every night. She calls it Robert. Frank told me that was the moment he had to look at the window. "I'll tell him," he said. "Thank you," Diane said, and she left. I was sitting on the dock when Frank finished. The Gulf was the color it goes in the early evening, somewhere between green and gray, the light coming off it sideways. "She's standing up," Frank said. "Yeah," I said. "She is." I sat there after we hung up, hands on my knees, the warm Key West evening moving around me, and I thought about Lily sleeping with a small wooden horse she had named Robert. I thought about Eleanor in the delivery room in 1991, the day Diane was born, how she had looked at me over the head of that new, improbable person and said, "She's going to be something, Robert. Just wait." I went inside, opened the drawer, took out the envelope, looked at Diane's name in my best handwriting. Then I picked up the phone and called Frank. "Tell her to come," I said. "When she's ready, not before, but tell her the door is open." By August, I had stopped counting the months. The Eleanor May was sitting in her slip, rebuilt from the frames out, new planking, new deck, new rigging. She looked like what she was, something that had been taken apart completely and put back together by someone who understood what it was supposed to be. I had been running her engine at the dock that Thursday morning, just listening to it find its rhythm when Frank called. "The board issued its final determination yesterday," he said. "Permanent revocation. No path to reinstatement." I cut the engine. The Tribeca and Westchester findings alone were enough, Frank continued. Combined with the LLC fraud and the forgery, the board didn't deliberate long. His attorney released a statement about advisory consulting work. A pause. "Unlicensed. About a third of what he used to charge." "The house," I asked. "Listed in July. Sold in 3 weeks. They're in Paramus now. 2-bedroom rental." I thought about the dining room on the Upper East Side. The long, dark table. The crystal. The chair they had put me in near the kitchen beside the service corridor. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt something quieter, the particular weight of watching a consequence arrive that you set in motion and cannot call back. It was right. It was still not easy. "Lily," I asked. "Mrs. Ruth is calling you," Frank said. "Give her 10 minutes." Mrs. Ruth called at 9:15. She had left the Vance household in July, was working in Brooklyn Heights now, and her voice carried the settled quality of a woman who had put distance between herself and something difficult and was breathing better for it. "Lily is in a new school in Paramus," she said. "She's quiet. But Mr. Calloway—" Her voice softened the way voices do when the person being named is someone you are working to protect. "She has the horse on her nightstand. She asked me last week if you knew she still had it." My throat closed. "Tell her yes," I said when I could. "Tell her I know. I also want you to know his attorney made 2 more attempts on the 529 account. Carol's office responded once. There have been no further attempts." "Thank you, Ruth," I said, "for all of it, from the very beginning." "It was the right thing," she said. "I knew it when I made those copies. I just needed the moment to arrive." After she hung up, I sat on the dock in the August heat, the full, honest Key West heat that asks something of you just by being present, and I let it ask. Frank called again on the afternoon of October 15th. "Yesterday," he said without preamble. "October 14th. A boy." I sat very still in the Eleanor May's cockpit. Both of them are fine, Frank said. Diane is fine, he's healthy. 5 pounds 11 ounces. A breath that carried everything. She named him James Harold Calloway. No Vance anywhere in the name. I put the phone down on the seat beside me. James. Eleanor's father. Harold. Mine. Both names given to a boy who had arrived on October 14th, belonging to no story but his own. The dock lines held. The harbor moved in its patient, indifferent way. And I sat in the cockpit of the Eleanor May, this boat that had been broken and put back together and was now finally ready, and I pressed both hands flat against the wheel and breathed until the burning behind my eyes did what it needed to do. I picked up the phone. Frank, I said. Yeah, he said. 38 years. That was enough. I went inside, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope with Diane's name on the front. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put on my coat, walked to the post office on Simonton Street, and slid it through the mail slot. It was done. December in Key West is nothing like December in New York. There is no snow. The light comes off the water warm and low in the late afternoon sideways, through the palms, the kind of light that has no interest in being dramatic. After 11 months, I had learned to find that restful. I was on the Eleanor May's deck when I heard the car on the gravel, the particular sound of someone who has driven a long way and is finally stopping. I did not put down the cloth I was using on the bright work. I kept working. Some things you have to let come to you. Then I heard the small feet on the dock planks, running. Grandpa Robert! I turned around. Lily hit me at full speed, both arms around my waist, her face pressed into my chest, and I held on with both arms. The way you hold on to something you were not sure you would ever hold again, and my eyes went hot, and I let them. When I looked up, Diane was standing at the end of the dock. She had James Harold in a carrier against her chest, 2 months old, eyes open, taking inventory of the world, with the serious expression of someone who had just arrived and was not yet sure what to make of it. She was wearing the same blue coat she'd had at Penn Station a year ago. It was buttoned correctly this time. We looked at each other across 40 feet of dock. She did not run, neither did I. We are both Callaways, and Callaways take a moment. You didn't tell me you were okay, she said. I had to read it in a magazine. I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it, I said. I've been standing on my own for 5 months, Dad. I know, I said. Frank told me. She looked down at James Harold at the top of his head, the small, serious face then back up at me. So what happens now? She said. I looked past her shoulder at the Eleanor May. At the name I had carved into her transom 2 weeks ago, the letters filled with black paint, clear in the December afternoon light. Welcome home, James and Lily. The boat is ready. Now, I said, we find out if she floats. Lily pulled back and looked up at me with great seriousness. Does she float? She better, I said. I spent 8 months on her. Lily was already moving toward the boat shoes off, before she reached the rail, climbing aboard, with the fearlessness of a child who has decided something is safe before being told it is. Diane watched her go. Then she looked at me, and her face did something complicated, mouth pressed tight, jaw working, and then it gave way, and she laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded, the kind that comes from somewhere you forgot you had. Eleanor's laugh. The same shape, the same timing, catching you off guard, the way joy always did in this family when it finally arrived. I walked down the dock toward my daughter and my grandson, and the child who had named a wooden horse after me and was currently standing on the bow of a restored 1962 Chesapeake sloop, demanding to know where the sail was. The afternoon light was warm on the water. I did not look back. I have told you everything now. An old man, a sold house, a cherrywood box on a kitchen table, a wooden horse on a little girl's nightstand, and a restored boat with a name carved into the transom, waiting on a Key West dock in December. That is the whole of it. People sometimes call what I did revenge, Dad getting even settling scores. But I want to be honest with you, what I did was not revenge. Revenge is hot. What I did was cold and careful, and took 2 years of paying very close attention. Call it family justice if you need a name for it. The kind that doesn't come from a courtroom, but from a man who finally decided his own life was worth protecting. I am not a perfect father. I stayed too long at tables where I was not wanted. I mistook endurance for love. Don't do what I did. Don't spend years setting a table for people who have quietly stopped intending to show up. The people who belong at your table will pull up their own chair. You will not have to beg them. A pastor friend of mine once told me God doesn't promise that the people we love will choose wisely. He only promises we don't have to carry their choices forever. I held on to that through every hard mile of this past year. If Robert Calloway's story stayed with you, if you've ever been the invisible one in the room, or the one who finally chose the third option, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone you know needs to hear this today, share it with them. It costs you nothing. It might mean everything to them. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. There is more worth telling. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for staying until the very last word. One final note. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted to carry human truths worth hearing. If that's not the kind of storytelling you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Step out here with my full respect and find what speaks to you. Take good care of yourself.